Yes, good idea. Thank you. We ready? Okay. On three. Good afternoon, everybody. I am going to call to order this meeting of the Health, Environment, and Community Engagement Committee. I'm Councilmember Cam Gordon, and today I'm joined by all committee members. The Vice Chair of the Committee, Andrew Johnson, Council Members Jacob Fry, Elizabeth Glidden, Alondra Cano, and Lisa Bender. We have three items on our agenda with one addendum that got added later. And my plan is to take that item first. I don't think it'll be very lengthy, but it is a public hearing that we're taking up, mostly due to a quirk of the notice that was given and the change in time of the committee that it would have come to. The notice was given that the hearing would take place today at 1:30 in front of a different committee, but they took it up this morning, and now we're at our committee now, so we're going to take it up again in case anybody came to speak on that topic. Then we have two consent items and one discussion item. So why don't we see if anybody's here to speak on this. Maybe we'll just get a little update so we understand what it's about from Mr. Wilson, and then I'll open the public hearing and see if anyone's here to speak. Welcome.
Mr. Chair, I'm Grant Wilson from the Business Licensing Department. Thank you for allowing us to host this public hearing here today. And I'd like to personally apologize to Mr. Omar Ansari, the owner of Surly Brewing, and his team for having to appear twice today. They came at 9:30 this morning. Surly Brewing Company at 520 Malcolm Avenue Southeast is seeking an on-sale liquor license to have a tap room in conjunction with their brewery. This site will have seating indoors for 522 persons, outside for 144, with occupant loads that will far exceed that should they need expansion room. They do have a parking requirement of 182 vehicle spaces and 100 bike spaces. They have been able to meet that requirement. And again, the Surly Brewing Company is owned by Omar Ansari, and he is 100% owner and president. The main hall level is approximately 4,600 square feet and will seat 276 people at tables and a bar. The restaurant on the second level is approximately 1,800 square feet and has a capacity of 86 people. And an event center on the second level will have seating for 144 persons. The outdoor area is a large garden area on the western side of the building. That will be kind of on this side of the building over here. This area will have garden features with trees, shrubs, and other vegetation, sunken garden, a stage area, fire pit, and areas for people to gather. A public hearing is required for this application because there's not been an on-sale liquor license at this site before. We did notify all persons and property owners within 600 feet. We did mail 25 notices, and we notified the Prospect Park East River Road Improvement Association, Stadium Village Commercial Association, and the Southeast Business Association. We received 4 responses from that mailing, and all 4 are in support, including the Prospect Park East River Road Neighborhood Association, who sent in a favorable letter in support of this application. This application and the site meets all of our requirements, and staff is recommending to approve this license.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that report. And I guess it's we're fortunate enough to have the business here in front of us. I think this is a project that some of us are very excited about. But what I want to do next is open the public hearing and give everyone an opportunity to speak who's here who wants to speak. So that's open. I don't see that anybody has signed in. Is there anybody who didn't sign in but would like to speak? Yes, sir. If you did, were you going to?
Okay, sorry, wrong issue.
Okay. All right, I'm seeing nobody coming forward to speak, so I'm going to close the public hearing, and I'm going to move the staff recommendation, and Councilmember Johnson has a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to disclose that Several years ago, I helped work on organizing and getting the Surly bill passed through the state legislature, which would allow for this $20 million destination brewery to be built. At the time, it was incredibly exciting, and it's amazing to see it come to life. I know it's going to add a lot to Minneapolis and continue with our great beer scene, and it is just a very, very exciting project. So I'm glad today to see the owner, Omar Ansari, here, and my only request is that you brew some more Surly 4, because I still have my bottle of that I'm holding on to, and I want to be able to have some more of that. So I think he's taking notes there. But I greatly appreciate this effort, and it's very exciting to see this come to the community.
Thank you very much. I also just want to speak in support of this. This is a project that's in the 2nd Ward. It's actually in a key area that's going through a whole renaissance, I would think, or maybe it's being born for the first time, I guess. I don't know, but this is in Prospect Park North, and this is a really key location, located just off of the Green Line. People are very excited about it, and the community is very excited and has been very welcoming, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate that Mr. Ansari has been so open to talking to the neighborhood and discussing it and moving forward with this project. I know it's been a long time coming. We're excited about seeing it open. Seeing no further comments then on the motion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries then. Thank you very much. Then we'll move on. We'll take our 2 consent items next. The first is authorizing an amendment number 3 to the contract with the Minnesota Remodeling and Restoration Company for a no-cost extension through May 31st, 2015, in order to fulfill the scope of a lead hazard reduction and healthy home services included in a HUD grant agreement. The second consent item is a Healthy Homes Services grant, and this is authorizing a contract with the Minnesota Department of Health to accept an estimated $10,000 to provide healthy homes services in the Latino immigrant community and increasing the appropriation revenue estimate in the Health Department grants fund by $10,000. Both of these items will also be referred to the Ways and Means Committee. Is there anyone who wants to discuss either of those items? Seeing none, I will call for a vote then. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Those motions carry. And then that brings us to our final item, which is a discussion item on the report on uncontracted neighborhood funds. My intention with this item is to receive a report today, and for this discussion to be limited to a discussion about uncontracted neighborhood funds and try to understand the scope of that situation. It wasn't my plan to take public comment at this time, but I did want people to know that at our next meeting of this committee on November 17th, we'll be discussing the history of neighborhood funding and development, and we'll be talking more about the Consolidated Tax Increment Financing District and the bigger picture. And at that time, we will be setting aside time with this committee to take public comment. So if you're here today, you might want to come back then, and you might find this information useful to you. So with that, Mr. Rubador, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Gordon. Chair Gordon and committee members, good afternoon. For the record, I am David Rubador. I'm the Director of the Neighborhood and Community Relations Department with the City of Minneapolis. And I'm joined today by Robert Thompson, who is our Neighborhood Program Manager, and we'll be doing a joint presentation on the analysis of the uncontracted fund balance for neighborhood organizations. Before I get started, just for the members of the public, this RCA is already online, and the PowerPoint has been posted online also, and we do have copies of it available over there for anybody who would like to take a copy with them today. So the purpose of today's presentation is really just to give the committee an overview of the NRP the neighborhood fund uncontracted fund balance, and really what factors what it comprises of, and then also what factors go into how that money is moving forward over time. So there's a lot of numbers that we're going to be going through. It's a little bit complicated. I think we broke this down in a way, hopefully, that is a little bit easier to understand. And so if you have questions as I go along, feel free to ask them. But we'll see, hopefully get through this, and by the time we're done, everybody will have a good understanding of what's in the fund balance. I'm going to start with an overview, and then Robert's going to follow up with more details about some of the factors that actually affect the ability and the timing of neighborhoods moving these funds. The first slide, which was included in the RCA, is an overview of just the funding for neighborhood organizations over the last 23 years. As a council is well aware that the neighborhood revitalization program put in substantial resources into our neighborhood organizations over a 20-year period, really with the purpose of having grassroots, bottom-up planning going on in our communities to really help to affect change and improve our city. In that, phase 1 and phase 2 of NRP capitalized at a total of $226 million, which if you look at the chart, is the top line of both phase 1 and phase 2 combined. In addition to that, we now have the community participation program up and running, which has put in an additional $14.8 million into neighborhood funding. I also want to note in here, for those of you who remember, we did a $10 million reprogramming of NRP phase 2 money in 2010, which basically took some of the uncontracted fund balance and moved it from phase 2 into this community participation program. That's reflected in these numbers. So the total capitalization of the program for all three programs is $240 million over the last 23 years. In addition to that, neighborhoods also invested their money in a way that recaptures some of those funds, and it's called program income. I'll go through that in a little bit more detail in a second, but that was around 24.5 million additional funds that have come in. So the entire program for neighborhood organizations over the last 23 years has capitalized out at $265.5 million. Currently, the NRP, what we refer to as the NRP fund balance, which includes all three of these programs, is at $33.9 million. A little over half of that is currently contracted out and under programs that are underway, and there's $16.1 million left in what's called the uncontracted fund balance, which is what we're going to be reviewing today. So I just wanted to kind of walk you through how we get to the 16.1 that remains in the uncontracted fund balance. The next slide goes over really just a high-level breakdown of what's in that fund balance. The largest percentage of money that's in the fund balance is $6.6 million in program income, or roughly 41% of the fund balance is program income. The next largest piece, oops, Robert's going a little fast for me there. The next piece is phase 2, which is 27% of the fund balance, $4.3 million. Then we got phase 1 at $3 million, which is 19% of the fund balance. And then the community participation program, just slightly over $2 million at 13% of the entire fund balance. I'm going to go through and break these down individually, so just to describe what these particular components are, and then Robert's going to go through more in the details of some of the issues around, or issues and factors affecting timing and programming. So we'll go on to the next slide. So in the program income, $6.6 million remains in program income. That's 41%, as I mentioned, of the uncontracted fund balance. The way to look at program income, this is money that's already been used once. When neighborhood organizations, many of them were receiving NRP phase 1 and phase 2 money, they invested it into programs that actually would recapture capital and bring it back into the program. So the 24 million that's been generated in program income is money that actually went out in NRP programming, has since come back either through payment of loans, either commercial loans or housing improvement loans and what have you, that has come back into the program. Of the 24 million that has been generated from program income, 18.1 million has already been contracted back out, and so the remaining 6.6 million is what's left in the unfunded, the uncontracted fund balance, which is okay. And one thing I do want to note, and Robert will go into this in more detail, we also had an auditing change, or actually the state auditor required a change in how we reported on program income in 2013, which resulted in a significant sweeping of funds coming back into the city from program income of about $4 million, and he'll explain that in a few minutes. So there was a substantial movement of money back into the uncontracted fund balance in 2013, which has bumped up the numbers in that category. The other thing is neighborhood organizations, when money comes back in off of program income, they need to have a community process again if they're going to use the funding in a different way than what it originally went out. So if it was for a commercial loan development or commercial development, for example, and those monies were recaptured, if the neighborhood wants to use that for a different purpose, they have to go through a community process, basically to reallocate those funds out.
Could I interrupt just a moment?
Sure.
I believe there have been previous policy discussions that said neighborhoods could keep this money that came back in and maybe required the notification here. Maybe if you could just tell us a little bit of, are these NRP policies that we're following and got adopted when we transferred over? And do we know how old they are?
Yeah, when we moved the NRP programs into the city, we adopted a history of what we call the plan modification process, among other things. And so that there's always been a requirement that when neighborhood organizations have funds that they want to reprogram from one strategy in a neighborhood plan to another, that they, at the very minimum, have to do some level of community notification. If they exceed a certain dollar amount, or if they want to change substantively the nature of that program or to bring in a new strategy, they will have to do a level of neighborhood approval as well. And then also it may have to come to the NRP Policy Board and also the City Council for approval too. So
I'm also curious if you remember when and why it was determined that neighborhoods would keep the program income that was generated, so keep the loan money that got repaid to them rather than returning it to the city or somewhere else.
Yeah, that actually that was kind of vague for a number of years, but in 2007, as I recall, and I can go back and get some of the records on that, but I believe it was in 2007. And actually, I think I saw Cooper here somewhere. I think it was in 2007 when there was actually some action around keeping the program income for neighborhoods.
It was at the beginning of phase 2 when.
Okay, even further back.
City ordinance.
Yeah, so even further back. Sorry.
So it's in city ordinance that okay, thank you.
All right, continuing to move forward. The second big area of funding in the uncontracted fund balance is NRP Phase 1 and Phase 2. As I mentioned earlier, Phase 2 is 27% of the balance, and Phase 1 is 19%. The total of the NRP Phase 1 and Phase 2 original allocation to neighborhood organizations was $226 million. And so 7.4 million of that is what's left in the uncontracted fund balance. So a significant portion of that money has been moved out. In the uncontracted fund balance, everything that's in Phase 1 and Phase 2, with the exception of 350,000, is already in approved neighborhood plans, whether Phase 1 or Phase 2 plans. So we have 350,000 that's not currently in an approved neighborhood plan, but the remaining amount, 7.1 million of this, is actually already in a Phase 2 or Phase 1 or Phase 2 plan with associated strategies and how that money would be spent. In addition to that, just as a reminder for the council, is that that Phase 2, neighborhoods were asked during the most of the 2000s, from 2001 or 2 through about 2009, to slow down on their Phase 2 spending, because the majority of the money, or about 50%, excuse me, slightly less than half of the Phase 2 money didn't come into the Phase 2 program until December of 2009, the last month of the program, and that was with the repayment of the Brookfield loan. So neighborhoods were spending NRP Phase 2 money slowly over the course of the first, from 2000 through 2009, and only in 2010 did that program become fully capitalized and allow those monies to be moved out. In addition to that, just as the slide indicates here, as I mentioned, of the 226 million in Phase 1 and Phase 2, the amount that remains in the uncontracted fund balance is 3.3% of the original allocations. Moving on to the next program is the Community Participation Program, the newest program that we have. This has been up and running since 2011. $14.8 million has gone to neighborhood organizations through this program. This includes the $10 million that was reprogrammed from NRP Phase 2 into the Community Participation Program. Of that funding, $12.6 million has been contracted, with roughly a little less than 15% of it remains uncontracted and in the uncontracted fund balance.
Let's pause for a question here from Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Roberto, could you just go back to the previous slide, please?
Sure.
Previous one again. I just want to make sure I understand this right. So 226 million for both phase 1 and phase 2. Of that 7.4 remains. What was the 350,000 that you referenced just a bit ago?
Chair Gordon and Councilmember Fry, the 350,000 is out of the 7.5 million, 7.4 million that's in the uncontracted fund balance. All but 350,000 is an approved NRP phase 1 or phase 2 plans. There's 350,000 of that that's not in a phase 1 or phase 2 plan.
Okay, when you say it's been in an approved plan, what would be, just give me a couple examples of how that would look.
Sure, the way the neighborhood revitalization program works is that the neighborhoods receive an allocation either in phase 1 or phase 2. The neighborhood goes out and does an extensive community engagement process to determine how those monies are spent, puts together a plan of how those would be spent, and then that comes into the city, first being reviewed by the NRP policy board and then eventually by the city council, and those plans are adopted. Once those plans are adopted, then they can start contracting out the work under each one of the strategies in the plan. When I'm referring to that, it's the 7.1 million, roughly 7.1 million of those funds are already in those approved NRP phase 1 and phase 2 plans, meaning that the NRP policy board and the city council has already adopted those plans.
Right, so I'm looking for just what would be an example of one of those plans. Is it like small area plan, or this is master plan work? These are plans regarding financing of or refinancing of residential?
Neighborhood Chair Gordon and Councilmember Fry, neighborhood revitalization program plans basically include a lot of different things in them. Right. By law, 52.5% of the NRP money has to be used for housing, so there's a lot of housing projects that are included in there. Housing programs, loan programs for home fix-ups, home buyer assistance programs, those type of things. In addition to that, money has been used for commercial development. Some of it's been for community building activities. So it's a variety of different things. It's a comprehensive plan that these communities have put together that include a very large gamut of different activities.
Councilmember, Chair Gardner and Councilmember Fry, real quickly, each neighborhood, as David was saying, have received a phase 1 allocation for 10 years and a phase 2 allocation for 10 years. Every neighborhood got a phase 1 plan, with the exception of University, which at that time didn't have an allocation. And then in phase 2, most of the neighborhoods, with the exception of a small number of neighborhoods, have had approved phase 2 plans. And as David indicated, those were developed through sometimes a very lengthy community process and approved by the community, approved by the neighborhood board, approved by the NRP council, policy board, and then the city council.
So when we talk about this, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Those plans always contain a amount of money on the plans that also get approved to go with the plan implementation. And the way I read this, it means everything except $350,000 is counted for within the neighborhood plans.
Okay, so it's within the plan, but hasn't necessarily been contracted.
Correct.
Okay, so for a purpose, but not explicitly stated what that purpose is. So general purpose. Would that be a good way of saying it, or?
That's a good way to look at it. So
Okay.
within the plan, there'll be different strategies. The park board might actually get some money to put in a new gym floor if you were looking for examples, but they haven't been contracted yet. That strategy is still sitting there waiting for it to actually be implemented. So there'll be money uncontracted, but maybe tied to a strategy.
Understood. Thank you.
Did you want to elaborate a little bit, and then we have another question?
Please, yeah, Chair Gardner and Councilmember Fry. Some plans were fairly explicit about what the uses were for. Some were more general, and so some would have some very general descriptions of housing programs, and some would say very explicitly, we're going to do, for low-income housing at such and such % interest rate. It really varied by neighborhood about how explicit that was.
And Councilmember Kano also has a question, perhaps about this slide.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, David, just to go back a little bit, Director Rubador, if you could explain just for the public record this law that you mentioned where the NRP dollars, I think you said 42 or 48% have to be spent on housing. Is that something, could you just explain that a little bit more?
Sure. Chair Gordon and Councilmember Kano, the NRP phase 1 and phase 2 by state statute requires 52.5% of the total funding for neighborhood organizations that are realized through this program need to be spent on housing in the city of Minneapolis. So that can be housing development, it can be also other like improvement programs, I think down payment assistance programs and loan programs for rehab loans and what have you for housing, but 52.5% of the money had to be on housing.
And you're referencing a state law here, correct? Okay.
That is correct.
So my other question was, in the community participation program funds, so I'm actually moving forward a little bit on the slides. You talk about how the CPP funds that are not committed in the first 2 funding cycles, after they become available, can be retained by the department for other community engagement work. Do you know how much money that is currently? How many cycles have we gone through? What year did the cycles begin? Is this an every 2-year cycle, every year, something like that?
Chair Gordon and Councilmember Kano, we are actually in the 3rd cycle of the CPP program. And currently, we had one neighborhood that got fairly close to running into that issue, but we have that since resolved that. And the only one that isn't in that particular case where they haven't used the money yet and haven't told us what they're going to use the money for is University District, which again is an area of the city that does not have an organized neighborhood organization. The CPP program, if I can just highlight, because that was one of the points I did also want to mention, does actually have a recapture provision built into it, in that if a neighborhood organization does not identify how they're going to use those funds within 2 funding cycles, then it can be recaptured and reprogrammed to other neighborhood organizations or through the program, reallocated to other groups. So we have built that piece into the new program.
Okay, thank you. I think.
Chair Gordon, to continue.
One more question from Councilmember Fry, sorry.
One more. So of the uncontracted 7.1 million that has been authorized for a specific plan, how frequently does NCR check back in and say, all right, we've given you authorization to spend the money. What's the present status? Why hasn't it been spent yet?
Chair Gordon and Councilmember Fry, that's a great segue into the next part, which is what Robert is going to go through as far as what factors affect that money being able to move out.
Great, thanks.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could I just ask a clarifying question of staff or you? Is this money, so this money is just sort of in an account as part of the city's finances? We allocate the funds after there is a reimbursement, generally speaking, is that correct?
It's not always reimbursement, but it is in the city funds, and we will manage, when it's contracted, it will go out. Correct me if I'm wrong. So it's not given to the neighborhoods yet. Okay.
All right. Great. Chair Gordon, council members. So I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about these uncontracted funds. So I want to start with, back in 2010, towards the end of the year, the City Council went through some budget action to reprogram $10 million from NRP Phase 2 funds to help fund the community participation program. So currently, of that uncontracted CPP funds, 7.6, or not of the uncontracted, but of the overall 14 million, 7.6 million of that that has gone into the CPP allocations over the last few years is actually from NRP Phase 2. So that was previously contracted, and David kind of referenced that earlier. And I want to point out that the neighborhood organizations that have the highest amount of funds that were reprogrammed in December 2010 also have the highest current level of uncontracted funds. And this chart shows that. So you'll see a lot of the neighborhoods were held at 70% basically of their NRP Phase 2 funds. We've kept them at that level. And they also have the highest level of currently uncontracted funds.
If I may just interject here, just to remind everybody, when the $10 million was reprogrammed, just so you understand at the bottom of the chart here, when the $10 million was reprogrammed, neighborhoods were frozen initially at 50% of uncontracted fund balance, and it had varying impacts on various neighborhood organizations across the city. Some neighborhoods were really kind of early into Phase 2, and so they ended up having 50% of their money reprogrammed, while some of them were already at 100% and really didn't have any money that was reprogrammed. So what we're finding, just to highlight here what Mr. Thompson is stating, is that the balance, the vast majority of the money that's actually in the uncontracted fund balance are from neighborhoods that were hit the most with the reprogramming of the 10 million a couple years ago.
Okay. So the other thing I want to talk about too is the rate of NRP fund expenditures, because I think there's been a lot of questions about that. And to start, these NRP Phase 1 and Phase 2 plans, as I mentioned earlier, were really designed to be 10-year plans. There were 10-year allocations in Phase 1 and Phase 2, and the neighborhood organizations were encouraged to be developing long-term plans. And we've had neighborhood organizations that have been coming in at different times. So if you actually go back and examine the actual year-by-year expenditures of the NRP funds, they are closely correlated to the expected year-by-year expenditures. At the current rate of expenditures, actually, neighborhood organizations are projected to expend all of the Phase 1 and Phase 2 funds by 2021. Now, in reality, there's going to be, more program income generated, and some of those dollars will probably get reused in one way or another, but that's where the projections are. So if we look at this chart, this blue line shows when money was allocated to neighborhoods when their plans were approved. So you see a big peak, for example, in 1995. It was about $55 million that were allocated out. We had a lot of neighborhoods come in during that year. In other years, we had less. But let's say those neighborhood organizations then said, we're going to expend that money over, not over 10 years, but over 7 years, right? Because, they took, a couple of years to do their plans. They would implement those plans, and then they would do a review before they moved into Phase 2 and start that cycle over. So let's assume not a 10-year cycle, but a 7-year cycle. This dashed line here shows you what those expenditures would look like if neighborhoods spent out their funds over a 7-year time period following approval of their plan. So all of those neighborhoods that had expenditures from that 1995 approval spread out over the next several years, that's why you get that bump. This red dashed line, what this shows is the actual expenditures that we have seen over the history of the program from 1992 to present. And as you can see, it actually matches pretty closely what should be expected if neighborhoods are doing what they had been basically organized to do. Again, these are 10-year plans. They're spending them out over a long period of time, over 7 years or so. And in fact, that's kind of the way it plays out, even when we've had factors that have kind of slowed down and pulled back that funding ability, that programming ability of neighborhoods. But there have been a lot of factors that affect the contracting of funds, and it's really important to, I think, take all of these into account. So for example, a lot of these are volunteer-led neighborhood organizations. Sometimes they might have part-time staff, sometimes one staff, sometimes two, but they really are led in a lot of cases by volunteers, and that's really important. Also, under the NRP program, over the previous 20 years, there was no expectation that the neighborhoods would spend those dollars down in any particular period of time. So even though I'm talking about a 7-year time frame here, we never said these funds have to be spent within a certain period of time. The other factor was that neighborhoods entered NRP at different times. We actually, early in the years, had a lottery system where we only brought in a few neighborhoods to see how the program would work, and then neighborhoods came in kind of at their own pace. That was also a capacity issue at NRP because we couldn't do all of the neighborhoods all at once. So there's a lot of reasons why neighborhoods kind of spread out. This uncontracted balance, too, includes funds that are committed to projects that have not yet started. Actually, I was talking to a couple of folks who are here today who have, for example, housing funds. I'm going to talk about those in a minute that have it's some of this program income that came back from the housing vendors that they want to program right back out again to new housing programs. So these aren't static funds.
If I may, Chair Gordon, is just to emphasize that point too, because I included that in the RCA. But in a lot of cases, neighborhood organizations use these funds as first-in money. So a developer working on a housing project or commercial development, will you come in, ask the neighborhood organization for an allocation of the NRP money, commit it to a project, those don't go under contract until all the funding has been raised for that particular project and that project has commenced. And so they're obligated, but they're still staying in the uncontracted fund balance because they don't actually go under contract until those projects commence.
And also, we've always had, and Chair Gordon, you asked about this a little earlier, is, we make neighborhoods go through a bit of a community process before they can move the funds. And so it's been a bit cumbersome, but, these funds were approved by the community, and we want to make sure if they get reprogrammed that the community has an opportunity to be involved in that. And so when a neighborhood organization wants to reprogram funds, if it's more than $25,000 or they're creating a new strategy that the neighborhood wasn't aware of before, they will have to go through a 21-day community notification process. They'll have to demonstrate some form of community approval. For example, it can be a community vote, it can be a balloting process, it can be a survey process, it can be focus groups. different kinds of processes will be appropriate for different kinds of neighborhoods. And neighborhoods have kind of complained a little bit over the years. It can be a bit of a cumbersome process, but we do want to make sure that neighborhood organizations go back out and talk to residents. But also, again, as David mentioned earlier, neighborhood organizations were actively discouraged from contracting Phase 2 funds due to funding uncertainties. And I included, for example, a quote from a 2007 Finance Department report to the Ways and Means Committee at that time about the volatility of the projections at that time. There were a number of factors that really impacted Phase 2 funding. You know, from 2001, there was a big change at the state legislature in terms of property taxes that impacted NRP revenues, and a lot of factors that happened after that. The annual projections were just all over the place, so it was really hard to tell what was going to happen. So the NRP Policy Board said, we're going to throttle back the rate at which neighborhoods can actually spend their funds. And they said no neighborhood can spend more than 70% within the first 3 years. So we made them budget that out. Yeah, that's the next slide. Yeah, okay. And partly because of that, more than half of the NRP Phase 2 program funds actually only came in to the program after repayment of the Brookfield loan at the end of 2009. So really it was, you know, through most of the program, the funds simply weren't there to support the money going out the door really quickly. And that slowed a lot of neighborhood organizations down. So what I want to show here is, again, a little bit of a different issue. This chart shows over time when program income came in through neighborhood investments from 1993 on through the present, right? And so at first, you know, you get it, but you'll notice we have this big bump just in the last year. And David had talked earlier about the state auditor had a finding in 2013 that they weren't comfortable with the program income sitting out at the housing vendors. And that was money that was out there in active housing contracts where you know, these vendors were generating home loans across the city mostly for home fix-up loans, right, low interest loans. And the state auditor said we had to recall those and actually hold those at the city until they were ready to go out again. So at the end of last year, you see basically it was about a $4 million bump over what you usually see. So this $16 million of uncontracted program, you get one big bump, you know, that's almost a quarter of that chunk right there. This is money that neighborhoods already are talking about how do we reprogram that and get that out there. But we did have this one-time recall. Every year now, by the way, we are going back to housing vendors and saying return any program income to us at this point. And so we'll be re-sweeping it, but it won't be at that level anymore. So. And as I mentioned, neighborhoods are already planning for use of these dollars. So for example, with home repair, home buyer assistance, emergency home repair programs, Jordan, Kathy is here from Jordan, and then we reprogrammed $425,000. They're looking at putting that money into a new housing contract with Gimmick, I believe. Oh, with CEE, okay. And we have, Laurie Hill East is talking about putting $500,000 back into a housing program. They've had a very successful housing program over the years. Hawthorne now has we're working with them to put a contract into, that was Gimmick, $400,000. And this is important too. East Phillips, for example, is looking at, they want to put $50,000 in a commitment to the Phillips Community Center pool. But the money's not there yet from other sources. They have a match from I think it's the Mid-Waukeston Sioux community to help with that. So they put $50,000 up front, but we can't contract that really until we have an actual project available. But the neighborhood has asked us to reserve that money until the other funding sources are available to make that pool happen. And that's going to be a multi-million-dollar project. They're also putting money right now, $47,000 into safety initiatives and $30,000 for further community engagement activities. Holland neighborhood is looking at $200,000 for a commercial loan fund. In Southeast Como, $20,000 for home buyer assistance. And we have many other projects. These are just samples. And again, we have a contracting process that goes on every day. We have contracts where we're coming in adding money. Sometimes we're taking out money so that we can reprogram it elsewhere. So it's very active, like I say.
So Councilmember Fry was talking about the difference between the contracted and the what's in a plan, kind of, and it was, I think, $350,000. It looked like that was not in a plan, and then $7.4 million that was uncontracted. Do you think that difference is fully taken care of by these reserves or obligations that are made within the plan? So this doesn't add up to the total, and you said there's other examples, but it sounds like what you're saying here is our case is that most of those funds are already earmarked, obligated, or reserved for a specific project.
Yeah, outside of that small amount of money that is in plans that have not yet been developed or approved, most of that money is in phase 1 and phase 2 plans tied to particular strategies, and that's what enables the neighborhood to say, we're going to take this money now and put it into a housing program or some other program. So they are tied to specific strategies. If I'm understanding your question.
Yep, I think that was my question. And then I guess it sort of begs the question, do we have a real specific accounting of all of this? And I don't know if we would have to drive into individual neighborhood plans on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis. But it sounds like there's actually more than two categories, contracted versus in the plan, but there's this middle category of obligated or reserved, and I think it would be important that we understand that a little bit. And if you know, if that's easy information to get, council members might appreciate knowing how to get it. If it's not that easy, something for us to think about, I guess.
Yeah. Well, Chair Gordon and council members, yeah, there's sort of that gray area in between contracted and uncontracted where we, try to identify if there are neighborhoods that are saying we'd like to put this towards something, but we're waiting. Actually, I had a call from a neighborhood this morning, had another project labeled in here that I thought was moving towards contract. And they said, well, we're not really quite there yet, but it's about $150,000 towards, a commercial corridor. And so they have work that they sometimes have to do. Sometimes these funds are held up. The neighborhood, for example, might have a strategy for a commercial corridor or for a street paving project. They can't move on that money until, say, Public Works is ready to move on that, or until some other process has happened. And so it's not the neighborhood holding up the project, but, sometimes, waiting for some of those projects until other funds are in place might take 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Many years ago, I was involved in the Nicollet Avenue project, the street, what is now currently East Street. That took us 2 or 3 years, even though we had the money in the plan. It took us 2 or 3 years of doing outreach to the businesses, working with them, helping them work with Public Works to do planning around that corridor before we could even start putting that money into place. And it was also a matter of leveraging other funds because a lot of the money wasn't there. It wasn't NRP dollars, but we had to get about $800,000 in state funds as well. So, it sometimes take a lot of work, and that's why these plans do take time to get moving. So,
okay, it sounds like it's not as clear cut as maybe I would like. Councilmember Cano, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Robert, so out of the 16 million that are uncontracted funds, how many of those have kind of a plan or a strategy attached to them, and how many don't have any articulation of any neighborhood plan?
Well, let's see. Pretty much most of it will have be tagged to particular strategies. So, for example, if you look at the phase 1 and the phase 2 uncontracted dollars, all of that will be in obligated, in approved plans that are identified strategy by strategy. Okay, so those will have activities that those funds are identified for. Same thing with the program income. When money is returned, for example, from a housing vendor, it's tagged to that particular housing strategy that it was originally associated with until the neighborhood says, let's reprogram it for more housing loans, or we want to do that community process to reallocate the funds to another type of project. Okay, so the purple, the blue, and the red parts of that, and then again with the CPP, most of that will be either approved through a CPP submission, but the neighborhood hasn't contracted all of that yet for the community engagement work. They may have identified some particular projects that, again, haven't moved forward yet. We're trying with the community participation program to give neighborhoods a little bit more flexibility because there wasn't as much funding. So we were trying to give them more flexibility with sort of how they implemented those particular projects without having to go through the cumbersome plan modification process. If they said we put it here, then and we want to use it over here, then they have to go through a cumbersome process. We wanted to try and reduce that.
So is there any way that you could quantify this? Is there any way that you could list out how much of the 16 million already has an articulated plan and how many, I mean, I'm trying to just really understand the flow of this. It feels very organic and it feels like a moving target. And
Yeah, and certainly we could get to most of that. I wouldn't be able to tell you specifically how much, but it would be probably, my guess, the vast majority, at least 90% of all of those funds of the 16 million are associated with a specific strategy and a plan. And there's going to be a small portion of that that is not either committed through a CPP plan or a neighborhood priority plan yet. So, I think David.
Chair Gordon, if I may just elaborate on a little bit of development finance, was whispering in my ear there on some more details on this. Technically, the answer to Councilmember Connell's question is all but $350,000 of this wheel, in essence, is committed to a particular strategy. Even as Robert was saying, when program income is realized, it comes back into the same strategy. The program income, though, allows the neighborhood to reprogram that into a different area if they so choose to do that and go through that community process. So as we identified earlier, there's $350,000 of the phase 1 and phase 2 money that's not in an approved plan yet. I was just checking to see what it would take to get a breakdown by neighborhood of where all these funds are, and we could put that together. Just want to double check with the other staff and bring that back on November 17th. Does that work? With a little bit more detail so you can see where and which neighborhoods these funds actually exist, so you have a better idea of that. Because program income varies a lot by neighborhood. Some neighborhoods invested quite a bit of money into things that recover loans, and some of them didn't invest any money into there. And so the impact is where that $6.6 million exists varies quite a bit across the city.
Well, I think that would be very much appreciated, as is the can-do attitude I hear from the back row there. Councilmember Glidden has a question.
Thanks. This is maybe just kind of a clarification, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. And because I want to just take a little backward step here. I feel like of the committee, I think we all, of course, work with our neighborhoods and are familiar that they have approved funding strategies where they work on neighborhood projects, but some of us may be at different places because of when NRP came into being as to understanding this process. But in essence, every neighborhood that has entered phase 1 or for you to go into those phases, you have to submit a plan. So it actually would be more unusual for you to have funds that weren't in a strategy, because to enter the phases, and correct me if I'm wrong, but to enter the phases, and I think virtually every neighborhood, with few exceptions, have entered phase 2 at this point. I get a little off on that. So to do that, though, they have to submit a plan, and then as they modify their strategies as time goes on, then they can get those modifications approved through a process. But it's a pretty big procedure to put together your plan, and so this money is logically going to be identified to go with strategies and a plan. And then as program income comes back, it will go back into those strategies unless you ask for a modification to the plan. So am I right on that?
Chair Gordon, Council Vice President Glidden, you are exactly right. And of this entire 16.1 million, it's the 350,000 that's not committed at this point because it doesn't exist within a plan. But the rest of it is in a plan, just as you described. Either a phase 1 or phase 2 plan, or program income when it comes back is still in the plan. It's available to be reprogrammed into something else if the neighborhood so chooses and goes through that process, but it's in the plan earmarked for specific use.
So could I just ask then about the 350,000? Why isn't that in a plan? Is some of that the neighborhood, university neighborhood that doesn't have an organization and hasn't been able to draft a plan, or do we know what that item is? I mean,
Chair Gordon and council members, we have 4 neighborhoods that do not have plans. One, of course, University neighborhood, which there is no neighborhood organization there currently. And then I'm going to run through these. Hopefully I can get them right. I think it's Cedar Isles Dean, West Calhoun, that was it. One of the Calhouns. Yeah, West Calhoun, Sumner Glenwood, which is coming in soon with the plan.
you're welcome to join us, Mr.
Marshall
Cooper, if
Terrace in
you'd like.
Holland, yeah. But there's 4, and they're all fairly minor funds. Which one? Nicollet Island, yeah, so sorry about that confusion, but Nicollet Island, West Calhoun, University District, and Sumner Glenwood. And 3 of those, of course, have expressed interest in coming forward with the plan, and we're working with them. But the one that we don't have a plan for probably won't have a plan for is University.
And when we say a plan, that's NRP Phase 2 plan?
An NRP Phase 2 plan, yes.
So those are the only 3 organized neighborhoods that have yet to submit a plan for NRP Phase 2.
Yes, that is
And
correct.
that would account it probably for close to $300,000 or, okay.
Yes.
Appreciate that. And, okay.
Chair Gordon, okay.
We have a couple more questions. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the NRP stuff, I think, to Councilmember Glidden's point is sort of those policies have already also been set, and I don't know if we want to revisit them, but I was more interested in understanding better the CPP funding, and you did talk about this, that, there's been 14.8 million allocated. Most of it appears to have been contracted, but do we know, so for example, we give about 3.5 million per year in new allocations. Do we know how neighborhood organizations are keeping up with that spending year by year?
But yeah, the last funding cycle was 3.8 million per year for all of the neighborhood organizations. And I don't know if you want to kind of maybe chip in a little bit. We do track fairly closely how much they're spending. And so when a neighborhood spends money, they'll submit a payment request, and we track all of those payment requests pretty closely. I don't have the exact dollar amounts right now, but that's something we can certainly get fairly easily.
Maybe I could ask, do we have a policy about how quickly they have to spend the CPP money? Can they hold it all for as long as they want?
Chair Gordon and council members, outside of the kind of the recapture provision that David was talking about, no, there's no specific policy requiring that they spend money within a certain amount of time. When we were talking with neighborhood organizations in 2010 and 2011 about developing this program, one of their concerns was, this isn't the kinds of allocations that we had under NRP. So, but when we do have capital projects that we would like to support, it would be nice if we could save some of that money up to put towards a capital project. So we have one neighborhood right now that's talking about purchasing some vacant lots so they could do some housing development on those. But they're saying right now we don't, we have some NRP and some CPP funds left over, but it will take us time to kind of have enough money to really put into that. So we'll put in some now, some later.
So, and that's perfectly fine according to our policies. There's no limit on what they can roll over or how long it takes them to spend that. Okay, appreciate it.
Just to elaborate on a little bit too, is that in the CPP program, we do, as Robert was saying, we do allow a carryover. Neighborhoods do have to specify what that use is for. So it's not just, in essence, banking money, but what are they holding it for future neighborhood priority plans as they come in. So, but there is not a limit. There isn't a policy on how fast they have to spend the money.
Okay, but they have to indicate what they're holding it for. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am interested in looking at policies around how we can see more of this money put into the community sooner. And so I've been working with staff, and I just want to mention this to colleagues as well. I've been working with staff, and we'll be meeting with the Southside United Neighborhoods group, looking at different policy options. I know some other organizations have run into similar challenges, and so we'll be talking it through, and hopefully on our November 17th meeting, I will have something I can bring back for the committee, some sort of draft or something of potentially an option to help see this money be invested into our community a little faster pace. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions or comments at this time. Do you have any closing comments?
Chair Gordon and council members, no, I think this concludes our presentation. It really was, we presented it today so everybody would have a good understanding of what's in this fund balance. And we have no recommendation at this point, but just more informational purposes.
All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I believe that Councilmember Johnson has a staff direction he's passing out too. You guys, we'll call you if we have questions about it. All right, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have, as you know, been pushing for open data and a lot of different transparency pieces here. And I think that this one is especially helpful to the community. So I'm putting forward a staff directive, and I'll move this staff directive forward. It says, city staff will post the annual budget, annual report, most recent financial review, and bylaws for each neighborhood association on the city's webpage for each neighborhood association before the end of the year. Going forward, as each neighborhood association provides city staff with updated annual budgets, annual reports, financial reviews, and bylaws, these documents are to be made available on the city website within 30 days of receipt. Documents that have previously been posted for past years are to remain on the city website for a period of time consistent with existing city data retention policies. And I will note here that I have worked with staff as well on this policy or the staff directive, and that there are not concerns around the resources required or the ability to accomplish this.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Glidden has a question or comment.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess my question is a little bit around relating to this, the topic that some of these documents identified here are not created by the city. And I'm just a little bit unclear on what are, so just take bylaws, for example. And I'll say I think it's a very good idea to have these bylaws in an accessible place. But just my question is, do we do anything in the city to require when bylaws are updated that the city receives those bylaws? And I'm not clear on the relationship, because each neighborhood organization is a separate nonprofit organization. I know in a previous meeting, I have in previous correspondence with NCR and with our city coordinator's office and the city attorney, I've been asking for some clarification from the city that can be provided to neighborhoods and to council members and to city staff about what are our roles and responsibilities relating to these neighborhood organizations, because we often get a lot of questions and have questions ourselves about that relationship. But do we require those bylaws to be sent to us? If not, I think there's a big, I guess, a question for the city attorney on if there are bylaws on a city website, what kind of disclaimer that we have that our data is only as up to date as the information is provided to the city. So I just want to make sure we're clear with whose responsibility some of these things are and how that's going to look like.
Mr. Rubidor, did you want to respond to that?
Chair Gordon and Council Vice President Glidden, I believe the list, if I can ask Councilmember Andrew to read the list one more time, but I believe everything on that list we asked for already through our community participation program guidelines when neighborhoods submit either annual reports and or updates to their application process. I think your point is well taken on that, and that we identified that these are coming from the neighborhood and not developed and or sanctioned in essence by the city, or some way we can work with legal on making sure that we say that the bylaws actually come from the neighborhood organizations. We can work on the language on that, but if I may ask Council Member Johnson to reread the list just to make sure I understand what's in there.
Sure, go ahead.
The documents covered are the annual budget, annual report, most recent financial review, and bylaws.
Chair Gordon, and all those things that we require, the one thing that's different on there is the financial review, which is something that we conduct with neighborhood organizations. In some cases, they actually do their own audit or financial review, which is an independent auditor. That's very infrequent, but we would get a copy of that anyway. So this information we already collect. And some of this actually is already on our website. So this would be adding basically an expectation of adding a few things and then making sure that we post it on a regular basis on our website, if I understand the motion correctly, or the directive correctly.
Thank you. Any other discussion or questions on the motion?
No, just as long as we are clear, maybe I'll add this then to the motion, that this will include working with the city attorney's office on reviewing the documents and how to frame presentation of them properly on the city website. So with that addition.
Okay, that's an amendment to the staff direction. Did you get that, Madam Clerk? Okay, very good. Then on that motion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. That staff direction passes. And I will move to receive and file the report. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, that motion carries. And I don't think there's any other business before our committee, so this committee is adjourned. And thanks, everybody, for coming and being here.